Welcome to the DevReady Podcast. Today we've got Mira Mikosic, the CEO and founder of Simple Chic. Welcome, Mira.
Hello, Anthony, and thank you for the opportunity to join today.
It's a pleasure. I'll let you introduce Simple Chic and what you do, because I think you'll do a better explanation of it than I can. So fire away.
My pleasure. So my name is Mira Mikosic. As Anthony mentioned, I'm the founder and CEO of Simple Chic Women. We originally started Simple Chic in response to some of the devastation that was happening around the world within the fashion industry. And at its core, we were looking to actually solve three key problems. As you may be aware, there is a tremendous amount of overproduction and overconsumption. So the first solve for us was around really reducing textile waste and the sheer volume of textile waste going straight to landfill. The second was also around the type of textiles we were using. And over, a number of decades with industrialization, over 60% of the clothing we wear today is actually made of plastic, or it's, polyester, man-made fibers derived from fossil fuel, which is obviously not good for our skin or our planet. So in addition to reducing textile waste, we really wanted to go back to man-made fibers to eliminate the microplastics going into all of our different ecosystems. And then thirdly, it was really centered around solving some key problems that have been within the industry for women. And they are twofold. So 80% of the garment workers across the globe in the industry are actually women. A lot of those women are actually subject to slave labor, poor working conditions, and also all sorts of toxins as well in terms of, the materials and fabrics that are being dyed and used, and a lot of them really not even receiving the minimum or even a living wage. So we wanted to solve for, bringing to light some of the conditions that those women were having, and really look at how we can actually create a system that is also solving for the end user, which is absolutely ridiculous. So although there is a lot of personalization everywhere for customers, but this is, one industry that really doesn't, almost ignores customers' needs because it's so top-down driven by all of the designers producing the clothes and what the designers actually want versus what the customer may need at different life stages and so on. So really eliminating textile waste, having a more personal and customer-centric approach, and really putting an end to microplastics.
Yep. Okay. So there's some really important things there that you're trying to tackle.
Yeah.
With how you said that the fashion industry sort of ignores customers and it's more of a top-down approach, is that just to keep the fashion cycles moving? Otherwise people wouldn't be changing as much? Is that basically where it comes from?
I think the industry, absolutely. The industry is, actually, even if I step back and even it's not just this industry, we live in a very capitalist world, and, that for a number of decades has really ignored, people and environment, and has a very, profit at all cost and ongoing a need to increase, revenues year over year. So the fashion industry is no different. So it was forever looking to see how it can continue to increase those revenues. And in doing so, traditionally in the industry would only have, 2 to 3 seasons in terms of new clothing that would be brought to the market. With the introduction of fast fashion business models in the last, really 2 or more decades, brands such as, H&M, Zara, Shein more recently, have actually turned all of that, those seasons on its head. So they're actually producing just this beyond saturation amount of clothing, where they're producing new designs basically on a weekly basis. And so they have very much a volume-based model trying to push as much volume to the end customer, and for them at the least possible cost. And how they do that is by really cutting corners, not paying the workers, and not being responsible for the governance or how those workers are actually looked after globally through their supply chains, and also looking at the cheapest possible fabrics that can actually be used, to minimize the cost per unit. And that, through that, they actually just default to the man-made fibers, which are quickly produced and, least costly, but harmful to people and environment.
Okay. So that's more them just trying to drive profit than looking at anything else that a customer actually wants or needs. Do you think
Precisely.
there's any sort of interaction there from the customer backwards about wanting some sort of individuality or their own look or feel to it? Or is it more driven the other way? Because it can be seen both ways, I guess, but it's probably predominantly driven by the industry.
Predominantly driven by the industry. It's very, design-led and label-led. And obviously the media has a lot to do with that as well. And social media in terms of has obviously not helped that in terms of just women being seen in different, types of clothing. And this philosophy of, not being seen to be wearing the same thing twice. So I think there is a whole, ecosystem of players who perpetuate this consumer need for over consumption, more so than what they need. And I think at the heart of it, the fact that customers are basically, purchasing on average, in Australia, Australia is the second highest consumer of clothing in the world after the US.
I did not know that.
Which is just crazy. So on average purchasing around 27 kilos annually, and then sending 23 kilos to charity shops to landfill every year. And I think part of the problem is that customers can't, there is so much out there, but the irony is it's like a needle in the haystack. So when women or men or women in particular, try to actually find something that they need, even when they do have money, it really is, a needle in a haystack. So there's so much consumer time is actually wasted in going to retail stores, trying to actually find that simple black skirt or that's, a simple pair of trousers. Or if it's not, and there has been a shift to online purchasing, in part for women, because they also are so embarrassed around, the size issue. So, going from fitting room to fitting room and even just finding that, there is no parity in sizing. So it's safer almost and less confronting for them to actually just shop online. And what's perpetuated that is, brands are more than happy to accept the returns.
Yeah, I think I like that sizing issue is something I know that's an issue in the fashion industry. I haven't really considered all the points that you're tackling as part of your business. So the only thing that comes to mind is sweatshops. You would think of like, all right, Nike used to use sweatshops in the 90s or whatever that common term that people used to say was, but I didn't know that it's at that level. Like, as a developer and someone who writes code, we have standards that we follow, and when you write code in a certain language, it has to be written a certain way. So I expect there to be a sort of standardization in an industry. When you look at the fashion, just as myself, I can be a triple extra large in something and a large in something else.
Yes.
It just doesn't make sense.
No, and when you think about, how hasn't that happened? Well, a couple of things have happened. In the 1970s, sizing standards were actually introduced, across the world, basically. So sizing standards were introduced. But, that's over, half a century ago, 50 years ago. And over that 50-year period, the human race, in terms whether you're male or female, our bodies have actually changed over time. And obviously fast food has not helped. Living a more sedentary life, in office and sitting down all the time has certainly not helped the body shapes that have evolved. But what also happened is, so you have a standard that was introduced in the 70s, but it has never been reevaluated. So what brands ended up doing also, which is certainly not customer-centric, if anything, what it's done is created more confusion. Individual brands chose to deviate from those standards. So that's why today you go into one store, and it might be in a shopping centre, and the stores might be next door to each other. A size 12 will fit a particular way, but you'll go in next door and try on a size 12 and it'll be too large or too small. So it creates, I think, a big consumer pain point. And, yet another pain point in terms of just not being able to find what you actually need at a given time, even though you may have the money to spend.
Yeah, it's a huge frustration. I see it within my own family and myself as well. Now, so Simple Chic is a platform you've built together. How has that platform, or what's the value proposition for anyone using the platform? Or how would you bring people into the platform to try and solve these issues, just so everyone gets an idea of what you're trying to achieve?
Yes. So Simple Chic is basically an e-commerce platform, which is working through what we would term as an on-demand model. And very much from a systemic point of view has a circular fashion approach to it. So really keeping clothing as long as possible within the ecosystem before it actually goes to landfill has to be part of the solution in terms of restoring and regenerating our planet back versus sending everything to landfill. So we believe in making things on demand as and when customers need that. So how does that relate in terms of personalization and what we actually offer? Well, we offer clothing that's actually made on demand. So based on, customer needs in terms of whether it's fabric or whether it's their particular sizing and shape. We have designers on the platform who are part of our community who basically only create clothing on demand, made to order. And we feel that that has to be part of the starting point. So if you are actually looking at something new, well, let's make it right for you at the outset. Through the platform, the on-demand model also extends to ensuring that we don't actually just, we utilize more fully what we also already have in our wardrobe. So if we have something that's in our wardrobe that no longer fits, how can customers upcycle that or potentially redesign it or alter or repair it to extend the life of the clothing?
You're not a typical founder that we speak to as a non-tech. You've had a bit of a background and some corporate history in being able to get to this point and develop your platform.
Yes.
I know you've got some unique challenges you're solving with this platform, and you can have probably a lot of challenges trying to educate people on these issues. But what steps have you taken to build the platform, and what sort of learnings did you take from your corporate career when approaching this build to get to this point?
No, that's a great question, Anthony. I might just touch a little bit on my corporate background. My corporate background is has always been a very customer-centric roles are the ones that I've taken. So having led product development, marketing, and digital transformation. So always, coming from a customer-centric approach, it was always, leveraging, quant data and customer behavioral data to really optimize that whole customer experience and the product proposition. So the use of data and predictive modeling has always been at the core. So even if I just give an example of, one of my early roles, I was working in the eyewear and eye care industry for one of Australia's biggest player, 300, 400 retail stores across Australia and New Zealand. And we had a, database of, at that time, over 2 million customers. So really, I was brought on to really optimize the whole customer experience and engagement strategy. So really using, everything from NPS at store level to see how we actually improve the journey. But more importantly, also really, how do we actually make any contact that we have with the customer much more relevant in terms of our offering and personal. So, throughout my career, I've had the opportunity through American Express to once again lead customer engagement and the loyalty program to really start to have much more effective communications and relevant, personal offerings to them. So it was a kind of a natural step for me to say, oh my gosh, when we look at clothing and when we look at the fashion industry, it was one industry for me that was interesting. It had all of these, I guess, global problems attached to it that needed to be solved around people and environment and the system itself. But it is an industry that has never really effectively utilized technology at all. I was just thinking the other day as well, it just reminded me, there is a core tool within the industry that's been used for centuries, and how it looks and how it functions, and I'm talking about the sewing machine, has not evolved. Yes, we have electrical versus, the pedal style automation to sew the garment, but it really has not evolved. How we actually make clothing, there is a little bit of digitization that has happened around being able to print patterns onto different fabrics in a digital way, which is great. There is some levels of efficiency that are being used in terms of cutting the actual fabrics for different patterns. There is, as I said, there is very little that it's been done in the personalization area. And ultimately, e-commerce brands obviously have been introduced, and there is a significant amount of volume being sold through e-commerce fashion brands, but it's all about just selling stuff.
The only sort of innovation that I've seen not being in the industry is more of a tech-related thing, which was, I think it's a brand out of Japan where they'll custom make bespoke clothing for your body type. I think you put on like a bodysuit that they take a photo of, and that helps them get measurements of your exact body, and then they can make T-shirts or clothing exactly to your specification. But that's the only thing that I've seen.
Yes, there. In terms of the personalization area, there is, and even I have heard about that one. And you can now go in, the gyms utilize them. In particular, you can do full body scans. So our ability now to digitally capture, the measurements of the human body is definitely not a thing of the past. But, the interesting thing is you don't actually need very many measurements to actually create customized clothing. Obviously it's very different if you're looking to have, a wedding dress made where you're wanting something that's true, really tightly fitted. But if we're actually just looking at, a pair of pants, to actually make custom pants, you only need a few measurements. So you obviously need the waistline, the length that's tailored to you. You need to measure the torso in terms of, from the belly button to the groin area. I'm not saying that very eloquently.
That's
but,
okay.
So some people like to have a lower waist or a higher waist, the hip area. So you actually, and I think that's the interesting thing, in order to transition to personalization, you don't actually need a tremendous amount of measurements. You basically need for any one garment, depending on whether it's a dress or a shirt or a top, but for the average thing in our wardrobe, we really need, 8 to 12 measurements, if that.
Okay.
So the ability to, even to have the customer measure themselves or to use a digital tool for measurement, and to transition to that can definitely be done. And there are different tools out there now, and we've explored some of them whereby, through using custom algorithms, you can actually enter in your height and your weight, your body shape, and then the system actually calculates your body measurements for those key areas, and then you can adjust them if you need to.
Yeah, and that's something you've implemented in Simple Chic.
That is something that we've actually built into the next round of functional specs that we are looking to do. At the moment, we find that the makers that we use on our platform and customers, it's also not difficult to, even have a virtual call with the customer and to help them take their core measurements, or to actually do that in person. Because once the measurements are captured, assuming that the individual doesn't, obviously change physique too much, you have them, and, they can be retained on the customer's file.
Thinking about that experience you had in that corporate world, and now tackling the challenges in these new challenges effectively for most people, because they don't really understand what's happening in the fashion world. What sort of learnings did you take when you were building that platform? Like, have you had one version that you've built on, or was there, similar to other co-founders, you had the first version, it wasn't right, and you've pivoted and moved forward?
Yes, so we, the first MPV that we had done and had developed was looking at providing customers an opportunity through a very simple platform to actually start to have the choice to actually customize their own clothing. So we ended up actually just taking some core garments. So what we ended up using was really just starting off with 2 dress types. So a shift dress and a wrap dress. And we, through the platform, the customer was enabled to choose their fabric type, choose their fabric color, as well as being able to choose a selection of different attributes about the dresses. So, for example, they could choose a neckline that might be anything from a V-neck or a square neck to a boat neck. We also allow the customers to be able to obviously choose the length of the skirt or the dress of the skirt of the dress, as well as allowing customers to choose different sleeve types. So that's where we started, just with through our MPV, just starting with a couple of garments where customers were able to actually personalize the garment based on their needs. And through that personalization process, then basically go to, shop. The platform would automatically recalculate the cost of the garment based on what was selected in terms of fabric type and so on. And we actually found a partner that we partnered with in Mantua Sewing Studio in Queensland to support us locally in producing those garments. The next reiteration of that that we are in the midst of was looking at then not just giving the customer the choice to customize their own clothing. So similar to, and I think this is also allowing the customer in the driver's seat.
Okay.
Similar to how we've allowed the customer in the driver's seat with publishing. So, publishing was always, only available to the professionals. So publishing, Adobe had very much the monopoly in that space through their creative, in design, Photoshop and so on. And now with the introduction of Canva, we've basically democratized publishing. So we believe that there is an opportunity for the customer to also become the designer of their own clothes and not to have to wait and in the hope that they're going to be able to find what they want in this next drop of the latest fashion or what's already out there.
Okay, so it's giving more flexibility to control more of the parameters, or start with a blank slate and then design what they're
Absolutely,
after.
because invariably the customers, when women are looking to shop, they usually have something in mind, and they know over time what actually works for them and what necklines or lengths might be best for them. The problem being they can't get to that. They have to basically go through this trawling of screens in the hope that they might find what they're looking for, or whether hopefully Google search engine might work to their advantage. But invariably they might find something near what they want, but invariably even if they buy it, they still need to have it altered, which is an additional cost. Or even if they do find it, it's not in the color that they want. So we believe there is an opportunity to really democratize fashion. At the moment, it might surprise you to learn that 60% of the clothing that is designed for women is designed by men.
I did not know that.
And the women's the apparel industry is worth, well over, $3 trillion globally.
Okay, wow.
And, with women consuming as much as they consume, to not really have input in that. And certainly there are a number of aspirational women, independent women designers who would like to be able to break into the industry. But unfortunately, it takes money, and the current model just is not set up for success. So the current model is about actually producing a small range in the hope that it might sell. And then if that small range doesn't sell, then, it's another further capital outlay to be able to get that next. So it's very iterative and very, financially, very financially
difficult to
hungry,
set up and roll out.
Sadly with, female entrepreneurs, as you may be aware, when it comes to funding and investment, only 3%, if that, investment goes to females.
I didn't know that. That's that. Wow.
So we're not really, set up to give women what they want in terms of supporting them in, establishing a women's line of their own. So unfortunately, with the current model being very much a profit at all cost for a few, but truly at the cost of ultimately many people, as well as the planet.
Yeah, I don't think many people know about that positioning and the approach that the industry takes and the effort required to try and break into it.
Sorry, can you repeat that?
I don't think a lot of people understand of how it actually operates and how, say, most men design women's clothes, or it requires such a huge capital outlay to try and break into the industry as a new designer.
Absolutely. It's very financially, to produce clothing locally. Only 3% of the clothing that we wear in Australia is actually produced in Australia.
Yeah, I can imagine it's mostly overseas in the lower wage market.
It comes from overseas. So you have more than 95% of clothing coming from offshore. And the clothing that does arrive into Australia, on average, the cost of that to retailers is less than $5.
Wow.
So it's a very highly competitive market. So for new independent designers to be able to, effectively grow and prosper, they're kind of restricted in terms of the what they can actually charge for the garment in terms of its value if it's produced locally and it's produced with quality fabric. So the whole industry really does require this entire systemic change versus in terms of the business model itself. And that's why we really stepped back to really relook at it. And when we started the business, we really wanted to create. And if you look at the end-to-end supply chain and how complex it is, and we felt that we needed a systemic approach to really be able to change that we wanted to create in the world, basically.
Yeah, it's a really unique challenge you're trying to break through and fight against the establishment there. So just touching back on sort of your MVP and that initial approach, did you talk with stakeholders, or was it the two garments selected because that's the relationship you had with that sewing lab, that's what they could make? Or did you talk to stakeholders and have customers come in and give you their opinion on what direction to build, and how did you validate the idea of the MVP?
Yeah, so we ended up speaking to a number of the customers, and we felt that the most common garment and the simplest garment in a wardrobe for women, was a dress. It's just one piece that you actually just throw on, and that's it. And you might accessorize with it. But it's also one of the more complex pieces because it does actually require, the right fit and the right shape. So we wanted to actually just start off with a single garment versus, starting with skirts and tops because of the more variables that you would actually have in those two pieces. So it was really just starting, with something at the foundation level.
And did you end up talking to end customers before you built the MVP to see if this is something they would use, or did you have sort of some experience in the past?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So one of the first things that I had done was obviously coming back from a research and insights perspective throughout my career, and having sat through 300 research groups globally and lots of quant studies. So customer is always at the forefront. So I ended up actually also just engaging with 6 to 8 women, all different shapes and sizes. And I worked with them in terms of customization of a few different clothing pieces to really understand what their challenges and needs were. And what we found is that there are certainly some universal needs. So it doesn't matter, if you're a petite size 8 or if you're a larger, body and height. Women seem to experience all the same core issues. And even if we look at, and this is the problem with sizing, so even if you look at one size, and there's numerous studies that have been done in the UK as well around this. So even within one size, there is still, in particular for women, because we have different, some women are more welling down, some have smaller hips, larger hips. So even if you're a particular size 8 or whether you're a size 20, there is a mix of different body shapes within those sizes, and the body shapes are just not catered to. So although, you might fit into a size 8 and it might sit well with you at the top, but your hips, it might not sit well on your hips, or the length might be too long. So size is a very one-dimensional way to actually look at it, and is based on a fit model for the purposes. And it's usually an hourglass shape, which only represents, a percentage of the people there. So we worked with different women and worked with a particular a tailor and seamstress who was amazing to really understand the needs of the women's bodies across the spectrum of body shapes and sizes.
Yeah, and then with that very data-driven approach, was it easy to sort of specify what your KPIs were to say, all right, this MVP is a success, let's move forward?
So for us, it was 2 things. We wanted to make it really, really simple for the tool to the tool that we created to be really simple to engage with, because customer experience or that user experience had to be at the core. If it was complex, it was never going to work. So for us, really the two key indicators were ease of use, in terms of, there not being any barriers to through that journey. And the second piece was also just in terms of being able to, and this was the challenging piece, being able to also have something that we could, scale, so that we were building something that that could actually grow and evolve versus, creating code and then having to dump it and start from scratch. So we, and I guess given my background, having, worked with a lot of engineers and developers over time through, and user experience, being at the core, what we wanted to ensure is that from the outset, we clearly defined what our functional needs were and how that would be for the different personas and so on, versus just going and not doing the due diligence at the front end.
Yeah, and that methodical approach is important for anyone listening out there. It's identify who your stakeholders are, understand what value they're going to get out of the system and how you're going to address that, and then, like you said, create those core functional requirements to deliver that value. The rest of the stuff can add in and grow, and it will change after you release and get feedback, but that core functionality is key to getting that first version out and having it deliver value and be usable.
Yes. And what we found then is that with the first MPV that we did and the scope that we had, we could actually then look at evolving that to its next phase, so that we can actually start to use custom algorithms to be able to serve up through a recommendation engine the most optimal types of attributes of the dress that would suit that particular customer. So making it even easier. So giving the customer the option to either be able to, just like they do in Canva, be able to, with a simple tool, actually design their own dress, by giving them some choices of customization choices, but also by asking them at the secondary iteration, asking them a core set of questions around their personal preferences, their physical needs, as well as their measurements, to be able to then, for them to enter in, and fill in a short questionnaire with their personal details of measurements, as I said. And then for this, for the tool and the technology to be able to then, serve up a recommendation. So, for example, if a woman, had a particular skin type, may be more olive skin, and they may be more heavy chested and have a smaller hips. The recommendation engine would know that these colorways are better suited to this skin color, knowing that the lady might be more heavier chested and maybe broader shoulders. The custom algorithm up the back would actually know what necklines would, be more flattering for that body shape. Because ultimately what the custom algorithms are trying to do is, with anybody, is just create balance. Because that's when garments look, yes, when they fit, but also when there is just balance and harmony with the clothing that actually goes onto a particular body.
Okay. That makes sense when you explain it that way. Now, having gone through all this journey and understanding, trying to break into an industry that's probably very difficult to try and change and educate, for anyone listening out there that may be trying to approach a similar thing in their own industry or in a similar industry potentially, do you have any sort of key piece of advice on how to get in and make that MVP from your own experience?
Yeah, I think you just have to, for me, it was always about solving a customer problem, or solving a customer, need. It just so happens that the customer need that we were trying to solve in this particular industry, the industry had already a lot of baggage with it and just needed to be, and is currently being disrupted in terms of just how these products are, created and the impact that they have. So my recommendation would always just be, start with the customer need. Just being able to talk with, interview, and really get to the heart of what those individuals need in terms of not just the end solution, but, the entire experience of how they engage with your platform ultimately.
Yeah, and I completely agree with that. I don't remember where I've heard this statement from, but I always remember it's one customer, one problem, one solution. If you focus on that, then what you're delivering will work, which is exactly what you said, just in a different way.
One customer at a time. We're not a mass platform. And, there is a lot of discussion around, market fit.
Mm-hmm.
And I think also just, the customer relationship with any organization really needs to be, two-way. So what we found is that in offering an on-demand service for clothing, so whether it's made to order, something that's, made outright new, or whether it's repairing something or upcycling something, what we found in that is that one of the services within that scope of services, the standout service that people actually want, women, the most popular service is women already have in their wardrobe a garment. And I've often said this, every woman, and you probably do too, Anthony, every person in their wardrobe has one particular garment that they just love and they wear to death because for whatever reason, when they go to put it on, it just fits or it feels just right. And it's about how confident they feel in it when they're wearing it, the level of comfort. And that particular garment in anyone's wardrobe, and maybe if they're lucky they've got 2 or 3 of them, gets worn out to death until it's falling apart at the seam. And what ends up happening with consumers, they can never find that garment again anywhere in the store. So one of our most popular services is customers coming to us and just asking for an existing garment to be reproduced, but maybe in a different coloured fabric, for example. And sometimes having those same garments reproduced twice.
I completely understand. I've got a favourite T-shirt, and when I find one that fits well, I go all in that shop and brand and just buy a few more. So then I've got the fit for the next however long it is.
Exactly, and women even more so. They just, and we wear. I guess if there is, what we would love, and especially if we're trying to extend the life of clothing, is for every piece of clothing that women have and men have in their wardrobe to have that same resonance with them, to have that same desire to be worn over and over again. And I think with the advances of technology and what we know now, it's not rocket science. We are able to actually send people to, the moon. We're now on technology trying to get people and things to Mars. We can communicate with robots, back from Mars. My gosh, is there any reason why we should not be able to have a closet of clothing that is personal, made personally for us, and that we love each one of those so much that we wear them to death? That should be the destination. But at the moment, even as you've said, it's kind of, we've got this whole clutter of clothing, but really there's really 1 or 2 hero pieces in there that we just, can't do without. Yeah, and the others we really wouldn't care.
Yeah, and it'd be great to get to that point.
Yes, absolutely.
All right, well, thank you, Mira. It's been awesome having you on the episode and chatting about Simple Chic. Is there if anyone wanted to reach out to find out more about you, how could they do that?
Oh, thank you, Anthony. Very simply, hello at simplechic.com, or simply visit our website, simplechic.com.
Sorry, I said Simple Chic. It's Simple Chic. I made a mistake.
Well, that's okay. So chic, the word chic has been used in the industry many times in terms of just simplicity and elegance. And the word simple in our brand name is really at the core. It shouldn't be complex. You know, clothing is one of our most fundamental needs. The process and the effort to get there shouldn't be simple. So simplechic.com. Thank you.
We'll put those links out there for everyone when we release the episode.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Anthony.
It's been a pleasure, Mira. Thank you.
Okay, bye.
Bye.